I walked into that house carrying a heart full of hope and two arms full of grocery bags, thinking I was building a life, a marriage, a home. The kitchen was bare when I arrived, no milk in the fridge, no salt in the cupboard, not even a clean plate on the rack. I spent my savings stocking their shelves, filling their pantry, making their lives easier in ways no one asked for, but I offered anyway. I cooked meals from scratch-polished countertops until they gleamed folded laundry that was not mine. And still, they looked at me like I was an intruder. Lorraine, my mother-in-law, looked me dead in the eye and sneered, acting like this is your house already, like I had broken in, not married her son. Eliza dumped a bag of rice on the floor just to watch me clean it up, laughing like it was some kind of joke. Aaron, my husband, the man who once whispered promises into my ear, just stood there with that stupid smirk scrolling through his phone, offering nothing. No defense. No kindness. No recognition that I had spent 3 months trying to carve out a space in their fortress of ice. I was not family. I was furniture helpful when needed, invisible when not. I spent 92 days learning how they liked their coffee, what flowers Lorraine preferred, how to hang Aaron's shirts just right to avoid creases. Every effort met with indifference, every gesture thrown back at me. And still, I thought if I just did more, if I just tried harder, maybe they would let me belong. But they never intended to. I was not one of them. I was their convenience, their housekeeper, their scapegoat. I stood in the center of that kitchen, surrounded by people who called themselves family, and realized I was the only one trying. And the more I tried, the smaller I became. If this part of Sadie's story makes your blood boil even half as much as it did mine, do not hold it in. Leave a comment, share your outrage, and subscribe so we never let stories like this go unheard again. After that morning in the kitchen, after the rice hit the floor, and no one even flinched, I stopped pretending not to notice. The smirks, the silences, the subtle power plays had always been there, but I had been too focused on being accepted to see them clearly. Lorraine made it a game to watch me bend over backward and still never be enough. Her compliments were knives wrapped in lace. "You are certainly trying your best, Sadie," she said once as I folded linens with surgical precision. "But homemaking is something you are born into, not taught." Eliza's disdain was less poetic and more blunt. She would sip her coffee and make offhand comments like, "It is cute how you think candles make a house a home," or "I guess we all cope with being ignored differently." I thought Aaron would say something anything, but instead he became more of a stranger each day. He barely looked up from his phone when I spoke. If I asked him to back me up, he would sigh like I was exhausting him. He had no problem sharing a bed with me at night, but treated me like a guest by morning. And somewhere in the cracks of his silence, I disappeared. I began to shrink, not physically, but emotionally. I stopped voicing my opinions at dinner. I stopped decorating the table with the little touches I used to love. I stopped humming while I cooked. Even the clothes I wore changed. Brighter colors felt too loud in that cold house, so I faded to grays and neutrals, trying to disappear more politely. But no matter how small I made myself, I still took up too much space in their eyes. The final straw was Aaron's indifference. One night, as we sat in the living room, and I tried to show him a photo of a lamp I thought might brighten up the den, he mumbled, "Whatever you think," without even lifting his eyes. I stared at him, realizing that the man who used to call me his sunlight had gone completely dark. I was no longer Sadie, his wife. I was background noise. It was not just loneliness. It was betrayal. A quiet daily betrayal that came not from words shouted, but from words withheld. I was fighting for us alone, and that fight was slowly killing me. I was not just living in their house, I was haunting it, and somewhere deep inside me, something started to stir. Not sadness, not heartbreak. Something colder, something sharper. I had been good, I had been generous, and they took it for granted. They would regret that. If this chapter of Sadie's unraveling struck a nerve, let it out in the comments, and hit subscribe. Your voice fuels these stories. That stirring inside me, the cold, quiet one, did not fade. It grew. Every time I folded a towel without thanks, every time I cleared dishes no one would touch, every time Eliza rolled her eyes, or Lorraine offered another thin-lipped smile, it grew. I began to observe them the way a scientist might study insects, methodical, detached, interested only in patterns. Lorraine's routines were like clockwork. Morning coffee at 7:15, bridge club phone calls at 8:30, a brisk walk around the block before lunch. Eliza had none. Her chaos was its own routine. Late mornings, fast food wrappers, and shouting matches with her friends that ended in slammed doors. Aaron remained as absent as ever, hiding behind work calls that never seemed urgent, never seemed real. While they drifted through their entitled rituals, I became a shadow but a purposeful one. I began planning. Not an escape, not yet. Something more delicate, more dangerous. Lorraine's birthday was approaching. I remembered the first time she mentioned it in passing, March 15th, born the same year as her favorite Bordeaux vintage. I tucked it away like a sharp object hidden in a drawer. This could be it. My final test, my ultimate offering. If I could pull off something grand, something undeniable, maybe just maybe they would see me. I opened my savings app and stared at the number $4,000. That was all I had after years of cautious planning, all meant for emergencies. But I told myself that being unloved in your own home was an emergency. I spent a week combing through old conversations, trying to recall every food Lorraine had ever praised, every wine she ever mentioned. I visited the gourmet market downtown and bought the ingredients I had once only admired through glass cases. Saffron threads in a glass vial, imported truffle oil, grass-fed beef. I stood in the checkout line holding a $38 French cake mix like it was a sacred text. I was not just cooking, I was building proof of my devotion. Each dish became an act of desperation disguised as kindness. The stuffed mushrooms were shaped with surgical precision. The wine chilled in the back of the fridge like a secret. My hands smelled of garlic and determination. And no one noticed. Aaron barely blinked when I mentioned the birthday. "We should probably get her a card," he said, as though that was the ceiling of love. That was when I knew I could do everything right, fold the linens, memorize their tastes, sacrifice my security for their moment of joy, and it would still never be enough. But I was going to give it everything anyway, not for them, but for me. So when they rejected it, and I knew they would, I could walk away, knowing I had offered my whole heart to people who could not even be bothered to look at it. And when I left, I would not just leave empty-handed. I would take back everything they mistook for theirs. Every dollar, every effort, every ounce of care. And I would make sure they never forgot what they threw away. By the time the sun rose on Lorraine's birthday, my body ached from days of standing over the stove and weeks of carrying hope, like it weighed more than any casserole dish ever could. I had been up since 4 chopping onions, with machine-like precision arranging flowers. I had hand-selected from the market seasoning and tasting and retasting the pot roast until it tasted like a memory someone would cherish. I moved around the kitchen, like a woman possessed not with rage, not with bitterness, but with the desperate final hope that this would be the moment it all turned. That they would see me, that they would say thank you, that maybe Aaron would finally smile at me like he used to. But I should have known better. Lorraine descended the stairs like royalty inspecting a servant's progress. She walked slowly into the kitchen, her robe trailing behind her curlers stacked high like a crown. Her eyes swept over the scene, the roast, the garnished dishes, the carefully stacked gifts, and instead of praise, instead of a smile, she scoffed. "Acting like this is your house already," she muttered, her voice colder than the raw chicken I had just pulled from the fridge. My knife froze mid-chop. The words hit me like a slap sharp, deliberate, and designed to bruise. Before I could respond, Eliza sauntered in, eyes still puffy, with sleep hair, a wild mess of tangles, and made a show of yawning. "Some of us are trying to sleep, you know," she snapped. Her gaze drifted to my neatly organized counter, and the ingredients lined up like soldiers. Wow. Someone's desperate to impress. She disappeared into the pantry, then emerged holding a 5-pound bag of jasmine rice. She looked at me, smirked, and let it fall. The bag burst open with a loud crack, rice scattering across the floor in a wave of white. No one said a word. No apology. No recognition of what they had just done. Aaron appeared seconds later, drawn by the noise, and surveyed the scene. His mother's scowl, his sister's grin, me standing ankle-deep in the wreckage of my intentions. I looked at him, pleading silently for support, but all he offered was a shrug. Maybe do not overdo it. No one asked you to be the hero. His voice was flat, detached, practiced. I felt everything inside me go still, not shattered. Still. Frozen like a lake right before it cracks. I waited for someone to pick up the rice. No one moved. So I did. With slow, careful hands, I began gathering handfuls of broken dreams, letting the grains slide between my fingers. The kitchen was quiet, except for the crunch of disappointment beneath my shoes. And right there in the middle of the kitchen, I had turned into a love letter. I realized something chillingly clear: they would never celebrate me. They would only consume me. And if that was the way they wanted it, I would make damn sure the next thing they swallowed was the taste of regret. I did not cry. Not when the rice scattered like pearls across the tile. Not when Lorraine stepped over the mess with her mug of coffee and made no offer to help. Not when Eliza giggled and returned to bed like a spoiled child. And not when Aaron, my husband, the man I once trusted with my future, dismissed my devotion as overdoing it. I stayed quiet. But silence is not surrender. It is strategy. That day, I moved like someone on autopilot, nodding when spoken to, clearing plates no one thanked me for, and watching the clock, with the cold awareness of someone planning a quiet war. That evening, while the others vanished into their rooms and their screens, I began reclaiming everything they had taken for granted. The grass-fed beef I had saved for the one I had marinated to perfection went into the cooler bag, first wrapped with the same care I had once used to preserve our wedding photos. Then the saffron still in its tiny vial, like golden dust, more valuable than they ever saw me. I emptied the pantry like a thief in my own story, but this was not theft. This was recovery. The truffle oil, the imported olive oil, the jar of harissa I had hunted across 3 stores, all of it went into the bag. One by one, I erased myself from that kitchen. The birthday candles, 62 of them counted, and color-coordinated, were tucked neatly into the box, with the cake mix that cost more than my entire week's groceries. I paused only once, staring at the bouquet of fresh lilies I had arranged just that morning. I left them. Not as a gift, but as a reminder. The refrigerator emptied like a bank account after a divorce. By the time I zipped the last cooler bag shut, the kitchen looked barren. Stripped. Honest. A mirror of what it had always been, beneath the gloss, cold and empty. I grabbed a pen from the junk drawer and scribbled a note on the back of a grocery receipt. 5 words. No signature, no flourish. Just the truth. Feed your ego. It's starving. I placed it on the top pantry shelf behind the crackers Lorraine kept just in case, and zipped up my duffel. Everything I truly owned fit in that bag. Everything I had given them was now back in my hands. I left the wedding photos. They belonged to a woman I no longer recognized. I texted Sarah, my college roommate, who had been checking in for weeks. Can I crash for a bit? Her reply came within seconds. Always. Doors open. I closed the front door behind me, softly, no drama, no slamming. They did not deserve the satisfaction. The night air was cool against my skin as I loaded my car. For the first time in 3 months, I breathed without bracing for someone's judgment. I looked up at the house once, not with longing, but with clarity. Let them explain the empty fridge. Let them face the guests I invited. Let them choke on the silence they cultivated. I was done feeding people who never learned to say thank you. I arrived at Sarah's apartment just after midnight, the city humming quietly, like a lullaby that only the broken-hearted could hear. She opened the door in pajama pants and an oversized hoodie, no questions asked, just a long, tight hug that threatened to undo the armor I had spent all night putting on. Her couch smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. It felt more like home in 5 minutes than the Turner house had in 5 months. I sat with a steaming mug of peppermint tea cradled between my hands, staring at nothing. My mind played every moment on repeat: Lorraine's voice, laced with contempt, Eliza's cruelty disguised as humor, Aaron's eyes empty as he watched me disappear. But no matter how many times I rewound the tape, the outcome never changed. They had thrown away something rare, and this time, I was going to let them feel the weight of that loss. The next morning, Sarah offered to call out sick to stay with me, but I waved her off. "I need air," I said, and she handed me the keys to her spare bike. I pedaled through the neighborhood like I was exorcising ghosts. A block from her apartment, I spotted a small cafe with a hand-painted sign, "Marigold and Honey." Something about it, maybe the chipped paint or the warmth spilling through the windows, made me stop. I ordered a slice of lemon cake and a black coffee and settled by the window. The cafe was quiet sunlit, filled with gentle conversation and the scent of butter and sugar. I watched people reading, laughing, living. No one glared. No one questioned my right to exist in that space. It was the first time in weeks that I did not feel like I had to apologize for breathing. I found myself returning each day, slowly building a new routine. The owner, a soft-spoken woman named Marion, noticed. She offered me a part-time job behind the counter, just while you get your bearings. I said yes before the sentence was done. The work was simple. Clean counters, refill sugar jars, serve coffee with a smile, but each task stitched me back together. Day by day, I felt myself re-emerge from beneath the shadow of their rejection. I never told Sarah the full story. She did not need the details to understand the damage. Some friendships know how to carry silence. Meanwhile, I let Lorraine's birthday creep closer without a word. I did not cancel the RSVPs. I did not alert the caterer. I simply waited. Because on Sunday evening, at precisely 6:30 p.m., 50 guests would arrive at a house expecting celebration and find only confusion, an empty kitchen, and a note tucked behind stale crackers. I imagined Lorraine's expression when she saw the fridge bare, when Aaron scrambled to explain, when Eliza realized no one was coming to rescue them from their own coldness. And I would be here folding napkins, pouring lattes, and smiling at strangers who treated me better than my own family ever did. Sunday arrived with the quiet tension of a storm that everyone feels coming, but no one can name. At 6:15 p.m., I stepped outside Marigold and Honey to dump the trash, and for a moment I imagined it Lorraine standing in her dining room, watching the driveway like royalty expecting a parade. Aaron pacing with his phone, glancing out the window. Eliza tossing her hair in that arrogant way, completely unaware that this time she was the joke. I had not canceled the invitations. I had not touched the family group text. I let every plan roll forward exactly as I had designed it weeks ago. The emails had gone out. The menu had been promised. The guests had RSVP'd with enthusiasm. And the Turners, they had done nothing. They never asked me what time the party was. Never offered to help. Never thanked me. They just assumed I would keep performing like some unpaid emotional servant. So I gave them what they wanted, a performance. But this time, I was the audience. At 6:28 p.m., the guests began arriving. Sarah texted me a photo from her cousin, who was among them, Margaret, Lorraine's sister, dressed in full evening wear, standing, confused at the locked front door. Behind her, cars were lined along the curb, people holding wrapped gifts and bottles of wine milling around, like partygoers stuck outside the gates. The house was dark. No candles, no music, no balloons, just confusion and disappointment gathering like clouds. I sipped my tea slowly and let it steep in. Margaret called Lorraine, and the conversation was short, brutal. She demanded to know why the house was unprepared, why the caterers were not there, why Lorraine had acted so nonchalant when she confirmed last week. Lorraine stammered. Eliza tried to spin it, claiming she thought the event had been canceled. But then Margaret pulled up the email I had sent weeks earlier, detailed, thoughtful, flawless. Signed with love. Lorraine's face, I imagined, must have collapsed into itself, because now she had to explain how she lost the one person who had tried to give her everything. Within 20 minutes, the calls began coming to me. First Aaron, then his mother, then even Eliza. I watched each name flash on my phone screen as I wiped down counters and smiled at a customer. I did not answer, not once. Let them sit in their confusion. Let them drown in it. Let every compliment from a confused guest about Sadie's beautiful plan be another tiny cut. Because this was not just silence, it was precision. This was the echo of everything they ignored, finally coming back to haunt them. Back at the cafe, Marion asked me why I looked so peaceful. I just smiled and said, "Sometimes people do not deserve the parties they expect." Then I went back to work, knowing the real celebration was not at the Turner house. It was here in freedom and truth, and in the quiet revenge of letting them face the emptiness they created. By the next morning, the fallout had reached full force. I woke to over a dozen voicemails, each one more frantic than the last. Aaron's voice, once so calm and collected, cracked with desperation. "Sadie, can we talk? Please. Just call me back." Lorraine's was colder, angrier. "You embarrassed this family. You blindsided us." Eliza did not even bother with niceties, just shrieking accusations, and one final message that ended with, "You were always jealous." I listened to them once. Just once. Then I deleted them all. The satisfaction was not in their regret. It was in my disinterest. I had spent too many months shaping myself around their silence, hoping if I shrank small enough, I would fit into their lives. But now I saw them clearly. And I did not need their voices anymore. Word spread quickly. Margaret, Patricia, Frank, all the extended relatives I had once cooked for, cleaned for, smiled for, reached out. They asked what happened, why I left, why I let the party fall apart. I told them the truth in soft, steady words. Because no one saw me. Not really. And the moment I stopped performing, they stopped pretending to care. Margaret was silent for a moment, then quietly said, "I always suspected Lorraine was like that. But I never thought she would turn on someone who was trying so hard." She paused. "I hope you know you are not the one who should feel ashamed." That single sentence settled into my bones like warmth after a long winter. I returned to Marigold and Honey that afternoon with lighter steps. Marion, perceptive as ever, simply handed me a fresh apron and said, "Rough morning." I smiled. "Not really, just a lot of overdue clarity." I moved through my shift with a calm I had not felt in months. The smell of cinnamon scones and the steady rhythm of espresso shots became my new normal. There was no one yelling, no one scoffing, no one stepping over my efforts like they were debris on the floor. Just peace and kindness and quiet work that felt finally like enough. Later that evening, as I wiped down tables and restocked the sugar jars, a customer left a note with their tip. It read, "You have the kindest eyes. Thank you for being gentle." I stared at the words until my vision blurred. It was not about validation. It was about being seen not for how well I performed, but for simply existing. The Turners would keep spinning their narrative. I was sure of it. I would be painted as dramatic, ungrateful, even unstable. But I did not care anymore, because their story no longer included me. I had stepped off the stage, left the costume behind, and returned to myself. There was no grand revenge speech, no climactic showdown. Just a woman walking away with her head high, her heart intact, and her dignity reclaimed. Sometimes the loudest vengeance is the quietest exit, and sometimes the best closure is no longer needing any. Some stories do not end with an apology. Mine did not. Days turned into weeks, and though the voicemails slowed, they never truly stopped. Aaron sent a long email titled, "Let's Talk," but never once did he say, "I am sorry." Lorraine had the audacity to forward me complaints from party guests as if I owed her an explanation for the disaster she inherited when I walked away. Eliza, of course, posted a vague message on social media about toxic people who pretend to care, followed by a photo of herself holding a wine glass like she had survived something noble. None of it surprised me. These were the same people who watched me bleed effort and devotion for months and offered only silence in return. They could rewrite the story however they wanted. I just would not be reading it anymore. At the cafe, my days took on a rhythm that felt like healing. I got to know the regulars, Mr. Porter with his raspberry jam toast, the young woman who came in to sketch by the window, the elderly couple who shared one croissant and 2 cups of coffee every morning at 9:15. These people did not know my past, And they did not need to. They knew my name, my laugh, my favorite tea. That was enough. I smiled more, now laughed, without checking if someone rolled their eyes, and cooked without needing praise. My life felt like mine again. Not a performance, not a burden, just mine. One afternoon, Marion handed me a manila envelope. Someone dropped this off earlier, said it was for you. I opened it slowly, expecting more guilt-wrapped manipulation. But inside was a simple letter from Margaret. Handwritten, thoughtful. She wrote, "Sometimes it takes a moment of public shame for people to see what they have lost. I hope you never let anyone treat you like a placeholder again. You are the kind of person who builds homes, not just meals. Do not forget that." I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my journal. It was not validation I needed, but it was nice to know someone had seen the truth through the mess. As for Aaron, I never responded. Because closure is not a door someone else opens for you, it is the moment you decide to stop knocking. Now, every time I pass a party store or smell truffle oil, I do not feel bitterness. I feel pride. I gave them every chance to love me. When they did not, I gave myself permission to walk away. And I built something better, with the very hands they once dismissed. My name is Sadie. I was never just the help. I was never the burden. I was the foundation they stood on without ever looking down. And now, I am the woman who left with empty hands and a full heart and never looked back. If this story made you feel anything, anger, recognition, strength, drop a comment below. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so we can keep telling the stories that others try to silence. Bye!